What I want to talk to you about today is social justice and social movements. This is a type of debate motion which comes out in almost every debate tournament, and so it's really important to learn about. First, we're going to talk about what social justice and what social movements are, go through a bunch of important words within this motion type, and then we'll talk about example debate motions in social justice and social movements. So social justice is the concept or the idea that everyone deserves equal rights and equal treatment and equal opportunities. So what we mean by everyone is people of different cultures, people of different ethnicities, religions, sexualities, genders, all sorts of people, the fact that they need equal opportunities and rights. And social movements are initiatives and actions and groups that are trying to create these equal opportunities for everyone. There are lots of movements that have come and gone and are still relevant today. Social movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement or the #MeToo movement. Even a lot of environmental movements are social movements in a way. So social movements range in what they're trying to achieve. Sometimes they can be really large movements, and sometimes they can be movements that are a little bit more small, a little bit more niche. But yes, there are a ton of social movements that are fighting for a ton of social just causes. In social justice debates, you're arguing about how best to achieve equality, how best to give everyone equal treatment and fairness under the law. So how is equality achieved? There are a few methods that have been tried and that are being used right now. Here are some examples. One, the redistribution of power is when you take power away from the people who have it the most and you give it to those who lack power. So this is like a debate motion that is giving additional votes to people who are younger or additional votes to people who are older. You're redistributing power from the main populace to a separate, smaller group. Another example of achieving equality or trying to achieve equality is reparations, when you pay people for the mistakes of the past, or you pay people for the things that they had to go through in the past by giving them help such as money or homes. Another example of trying to achieve equality is affirmative action, where you give people more of a likelihood of maybe going to top colleges, or you give them more of a likelihood of getting jobs. This would target smaller groups within society, such as ethnic minorities. Another way to achieve equality in society is through shifting narratives and shifting the cultural view of disenfranchised people. So a narrative shift would maybe be shifting the way people perceive Black people or Jewish people, or changing the way that people perceive LGBTQ people. So a large part of arguing for social justice and arguing for the best way to help people who don't have equal opportunities is to talk about how these movements can help these people and talking about how we can change narratives and give direct impacts to disenfranchised people. Like, how can we improve their mental health? Or how can we improve their socioeconomic status? Or how can we just give them more rights in places where they don't have a lot of rights? Of course, there's a lot of concerns as well. In trying to help people who are disenfranchised, or in trying to help people who have less rights, it might lead to backlash. It might lead to more violence against these people, or it might lead to the rights being taken away from these people. So there's always a lot of arguments to be said in terms of creating more policies or giving more opportunities to minorities, but there's also arguments against that as to being like, hey, we need to do this in a more measured way. Or what about the consequences of our actions possibly? But very often, in all debates, proposition and opposition, we are looking out for the best interests of these people, whoever the actor, the disenfranchised actor is. This means that in a social justice, in a social movement motion, you have to quickly identify who is the actor that we care about the most here. Very often that actor is the disenfranchised group. So here are some examples of disenfranchised groups, some actors that might need help within these motions. We might be talking about poor people in the motion and how we can help poor people. Might be talking about people of color or people of different ethnic groups. Or we might be talking about the LGBTQIA community. Or you might be talking about women and their lower chances. Or about the elderly and how they don't have the ability to help themselves. You might be talking about people with learning disabilities or who are not neurotypical, neurodivergent people. Or you might be talking about refugees or immigrants. But social movements are super varied, and there are a lot of different actors that can be helped in a social movement and that we can target in a social justice motion. There are a few other factors that really achieve change for people through social movements. One is in creating critical mass. Basically, critical mass is the idea that you're getting more and more people joining the movement. The more people you get joining a movement, the more power that movement has to actually create change. A very good example of this is how Dr. Martin Luther King created a very big movement for the civil rights movement to gain rights for Black people in America. One of the ways that Martin Luther King created critical mass, gained so much support, was by being peaceful and by showing the police brutality that the African American people had to face during those times. This leads me to another way that you can create change for vulnerable groups, which is media representation. Showing these people in the media and then humanizing them, making them likable, making them understood. Right? So media representation can be happening in a lot of ways, and these days a lot of it is through social media. This is why hashtags have gotten so popular, especially with social movements. And the last way is the grassroots, very simple way of getting the word out and creating change, which is organizing movements on the ground. Fundraising, campaigning, protesting, being out in the streets and actually championing the social movement that you want. Like marching on Women's Day or marching to stop a war in a certain part of the country. There are a lot of movements that can be organized, grassroots movements where people can go out and help. So here's an example of a social justice motion. It's a very complicated and hard one. This house regrets portraying the lives of people with disabilities as inspirational. You would never approach this debate motion as, oh, their lives are not inspirational, therefore we should not portray their lives as inspirational. Disabled people or people with disabilities can have very inspirational lives. Proposition would just talk about how portraying people with disabilities as inspirational sort of lowers humanity or people's idea of how much suffering these people go through, right? Or that it would maybe lower the amount of will that people would have to make these people's lives better. And so side proposition and opposition in this motion both agree that we want to make the lives of people with disabilities better. And therefore, however, they just disagree on how to make the lives of disabled people better. What is the media portrayal that would put out the better message to help people with disabilities? But in the end, debates about social justice and social movement are very simple. Debates about social justice are about helping the people who need help and finding the best way to help the people that need help, to help different groups within society, no matter how big or small, right? To help people who need change, who need equality. There's a lot more I can go into with this. It's one of the harder motion types in debate. However, I think this is a really good start to understand this motion type. So I hope this was useful, and I'll see you next time.